All right, so are you ready to dive into the world of efficient learning?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Awesome. Today we're going to be talking all about the 80-20 principle, and you sent over some fascinating excerpts from the book, The 80-20 Learner.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, I'm really excited to kind of unpack it with you and how we can put it into practice.
Yeah.
So to start off, can you give us a little bit of a refresher on what exactly the 80-20 principle is?
Yeah, so the 80-20 principle, it's basically the idea that 80% of our results come from just 20% of our efforts.
Okay.
It was first observed by this Italian economist Pareto back in I think it was the late 1800s.
Wow.
Yeah, and he noticed that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by just 20% of the people.
Interesting.
And it turns out that this principle applies to a lot of different areas of life, including learning.
It's so interesting how, like, something from way back then about land ownership can apply to something like learning a new language or, mastering a skill.
Yeah, and it's really powerful when you start thinking about it that way.
Yeah, so how would we actually use this 80-20 principle when it comes to learning?
Yeah, so let's say you're reading an academic article.
Okay.
Instead of slogging through the whole thing, you could focus on the abstract, the conclusion, any visuals.
Okay.
That might be the 20% that gives you 80% of the value.
So it's almost like finding those shortcuts in a video game
Yeah,
to kind of get you to the next level.
exactly. It's about being strategic.
But how do we know which 20% to focus on? Because sometimes that might not be so obvious.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's where discernment comes in.
Okay.
So you need to figure out what are the core principles of what you're learning, and then focus on the elements that are going to give you the biggest return on your time investment.
So for example, when you're learning a new language, maybe focus on the most frequently used words.
Exactly. Instead of trying to memorize the whole dictionary.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and this connects to another interesting concept from the book, the 85% rule.
Okay. Tell me more about that.
So this rule suggests that the optimal learning zone is when you're succeeding about 85% of the time.
Okay.
If you're getting everything right, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough.
Gotcha.
But if you're constantly failing, that can be discouraging.
Yeah.
So finding that sweet spot, that 85% zone, means you're challenging yourself just enough to keep growing.
So it's like finding that balance between challenge and feeling successful.
Exactly.
So failure is actually a good thing in this case.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Failure gives us valuable feedback. It helps us figure out what doesn't work so we can adjust.
So how do we find that sweet spot when we're learning something new?
Well, when you're learning a new skill, think about your current success rate.
Okay.
If you're breezing through it, ramp up the difficulty.
Right.
If you're constantly hitting roadblocks, break the task down into smaller chunks.
Right.
It's all about finding that sweet spot for you.
And I imagine that changes based on, what you're learning, right? Like
Mhm.
learning to code is going to be different than learning to play the guitar.
It's a very dynamic process. You
Mhm.
need to be self-aware and adjust as needed.
Yeah, that reminds me of Tim Ferriss and his approach to learning new skills in a week.
Oh, yeah.
He talks a lot about like identifying that crucial 20% and just focusing on that.
Yeah, he's all about deconstructing a skill,
Right.
figuring out the key sub-skills, and then just going all in on those.
So instead of trying to become, like a master chef overnight,
Yeah.
you focus on mastering knife skills or like a specific cooking technique first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about laying the foundation.
Get that foundation right.
But it's important to remember this isn't about avoiding effort altogether. You still need to put in the work.
Right.
It's just about prioritizing strategically, especially in the beginning.
Yeah.
You can make significant progress.
So it's like we're learning how to be more efficient learners.
That's a great way to put it.
So this kind of ties into the idea of becoming a minimalist learner,
Hmm.
which is something else that the book talks about.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of minimizing clutter, not just physically, but mentally as well.
Exactly.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's dive into minimalist learning.
Awesome.
Okay, so minimalist learning, it's kind of like decluttering your physical space, you know?
Yeah.
You get rid of all the stuff you don't need so you can focus on what's important.
Right.
And it's the same thing with your mind. You want to cut through the noise so you can learn more effectively.
So how do we declutter our minds when it comes to learning?
Well, one key is recognizing what you already know.
Okay.
Instead of approaching every new piece of information as if it's completely foreign,
Right.
try to connect it to something you already understand.
So like build a bridge between the new information and something familiar.
Exactly. Yeah, and the book suggests some helpful techniques for doing this,
Okay.
like mind mapping. Have you ever tried mind mapping?
I have.
Yeah.
I find it's really helpful to kind of see the big picture. Yeah.
Yeah, you can start by jotting down what you already know about a topic and then visually connect new information to those ideas.
Right. It just makes it more engaging.
Yeah, exactly. And the book also talks about connecting new information to existing knowledge, even on an emotional level.
Okay. How does that work?
Well, we tend to remember things better when they have an emotional hook.
That's true.
So if you can find a way to personally relate to the information, even if it seems dry or boring at first, it'll stick with you longer.
So, for example, if I'm learning about a historical event, I could try to imagine what it would have been like to live through that time.
Exactly. Put yourself in their shoes, feel the emotions,
Yeah.
connect with the human stories.
They come alive.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a good technique.
I like that.
And then another thing that the book mentioned about minimalist learning is getting that bird's eye view of a subject before diving into the details.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like looking at a map before you set off on a journey. You want to get an overview first so you have a mental framework for understanding the details.
It's got to help with information overload, right?
Mm.
Because we live in a world with so much information these days.
Yeah, and the book offers a 3-step approach for dealing with information overload.
Okay. Lay it on me.
Step 1, be crystal clear about what you need to know.
Okay.
This ties back to your goals. What are you trying to achieve?
Right.
Once you know that, you can be more selective about the information you consume.
So instead of like falling down the rabbit hole of endless articles and videos, just be more targeted.
Exactly. Yeah. Step 2, limit your sources.
Okay.
Focus on quality over quantity.
I like that.
Choose a few reliable sources that you trust.
It's like having that small group of advisors as opposed to a stadium full of random opinions.
Exactly. And then finally, step 3, before you dive headfirst into any piece of information, take a moment to assess its value.
Okay.
Ask yourself, is this relevant to my goals? Is this from a credible source? Will this actually help me learn what I need to know?
I love that. It's about being mindful and intentional.
Yes.
Exactly. With our information.
Yeah.
But, even when we do all that, sometimes that feeling of overwhelm can still kind of creep in.
Oh, absolutely. But the book makes an interesting point about that.
Okay.
Sometimes what we perceive as information overload is actually fear or self-doubt in disguise.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So before you get overwhelmed by the thought of having to learn all this stuff,
Right.
take a moment to examine those feelings.
Yeah.
Are they truly coming from too much information, or are they coming from a fear of not knowing enough?
It's all about the mindset.
Exactly.
This is reminding me of the 5-hour rule.
Oh, yeah.
Is this a good time to talk about that?
Absolutely. Let's dive into the 5-hour rule.
Okay. Okay, so we've been talking about all these strategies for efficient learning. And, sometimes we hit those roadblocks where we feel like we're just not getting it.
Yeah.
The book talks about these aha and ha moments.
Yeah.
Can you explain those a little bit more?
Yeah. So, aha moments. Those are the best, right? It's when the light bulb goes off.
Yeah.
Suddenly it all makes sense. You feel like you've made a breakthrough.
It's such a good feeling.
Yeah. And then there are the ha moments.
Yeah.
Those can be frustrating,
Yeah.
but they're just as important.
Right.
They're opportunities to dig deeper. It's like, okay, I don't get this.
Right.
Let me figure out why. And the book stresses the importance of paying attention to both,
Okay.
even writing them down.
Oh, interesting. Why write them down?
Well, it helps you turn those moments into actionable steps.
Okay.
When you articulate what you don't understand, you can start asking better questions,
Gotcha.
seeking out the resources you need to move forward.
So it's like turning confusion into curiosity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And using it as fuel for further exploration.
And sometimes explaining what you're learning to someone else can help.
Oh, yeah. Have you ever heard of the protege effect?
I don't think so.
It's the idea that teaching something to someone else, even if you're just starting to learn it yourself, can deepen your own understanding.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because you have to explain it in simple terms.
Right.
Make sure you really grasp the concepts.
Yeah, you become a mini expert.
Exactly.
I like that. So the book also mentions a bunch of other learning techniques.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorites?
Well, we already talked about spaced repetition.
Right.
The idea of reviewing information at increasing intervals,
Yeah.
well, that's a classic one. It really works.
Yeah, it's like building muscle memory, but for information.
Exactly.
So what else?
There's the ADPT method,
Okay.
which is a great way to tackle those moments.
Okay.
It involves finding analogies, drawing diagrams, providing examples, explaining in plain English,
Okay.
and then finally giving a technical definition.
Gotcha.
It's a systematic way to break down complex concepts and make them more digestible.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the memory palace technique?
Oh, yeah. That's a powerful one.
It's a visualization method
Right.
where you associate information with specific locations in a familiar place like your home.
So, like, you imagine walking through your house and placing information in each room.
Exactly.
So cool. I got to try that.
It's a fun one.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We talked about the 80-20 principle, minimalist learning, and all these great techniques.
Yeah.
But I want to circle back to something you said earlier about setting our own standards.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
It's about taking ownership of your learning journey and defining what success means to you,
Yay.
not just relying on external metrics like grades or test scores.
Yeah, because learning is personal.
Exactly. It's a personal journey. So
Yeah.
instead of comparing yourself to others, focus on your own progress.
Celebrate your own wins.
Exactly. What matters most is that you're constantly learning and growing.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, I love that too. So I think we've covered all the most important points.
Yeah.
From this deep dive into the 80-20 learner, we've talked about the principle itself, how it applies to things like time management, information processing, even skill acquisition.
Yeah, a lot of great takeaways.
Yeah, so much good stuff.
It's been a pleasure diving into these concepts with you today.
Yeah,
I hope you feel empowered to apply some of these ideas to your own learning adventures.
me too.
Remember, the most important thing is to take action.
Yeah,
So pick one thing you learned today and try it out this week.
that's great advice. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into efficient learning.
Absolutely.
And remember, learning should be a joy, not a chore.
Yeah.
So be curious, have fun, and never stop exploring.
Mm.
Until next time, happy learning.
Happy learning.